Hey everybody, Neon here, going to bring you the Turtlecast episode that we just recorded earlier today with SirRhino. I just want to preface this that there was actually some problems with the audio. I actually specifically talked about it, that I thought that these things had been resolved, but there were some issues with it that maybe you weren't aware of when it was recording, unfortunately, so that's not the end of the world, but hopefully you'll forgive me this time that it's not exactly perfect. Beyond that, I'd also like to plug and remind people about our sponsor, Ink Gaming, wonderful place to get all sorts of custom gaming supplies and fresh, gamer gear. So check them out, and you can use the code a+space12 to save 12% off your order. And then also, we do of course have a Patreon page for the Eternal Cast and for a+space games. Either one you can do them is you've actually the same. Both of them go to my wallet, but it'll help support the show, help support me in doing the stuff that I'm doing, and your support that really does make a huge difference. So thank you so much for your time, and hope you enjoyed the episode.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Eternal Cast. I am Neon, and I'm joined today by SirRhino. How are you doing?
Doing all right. In podcast tradition, I'm showing up with a head cold, so apologies in advance if any sniffles get caught in this recording, but I'll do my best to keep it at a manageable and tolerable level.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's too bad for you on the Valentine's Day. You might interrupt all of your super spicy date plans. I'm sure that you had just a whole galaxy of really exotic plans, and the head cold just knocked it all out, right?
Yeah, tonight's supposed to be a sushi date night, and still going to be, and maybe the wasabi will help blow out my sinuses in the meantime. But the full palate experience may not be there, which I'll still take it. I don't mind.
I mean, I definitely am more than a little jealous. Not very much good sushi here in Northern Ontario.
I don't know if I'd call it good here either, but
it's definitely sushi.
fresh ingredients and fresh fish, not too far from where I'm at.
Yeah. See, I don't know. You probably know this, but I don't know if all of the listeners know this. But I did live in Japan for a while, and that definitely changed my worldview on sushi and food in general. Because Japanese food, when you actually get it from Japanese people and you're eating it every day, you just learn things, man. It is an experience.
Yeah, I have not had that experience. I've been to China, but I did not get sushi of any kind while I was there. Some other cuisine though that is certainly eye opening, at least.
Yeah, I would definitely want to go to China at some point in my life and just eat there and try out all of it, because they definitely have wild cuisine. Relatively speaking, they eat a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I would not recommend China as the first place to visit if you're going to any Asian countries, but as you knock them out, it's certainly its own experience.
Yeah. Well, we did not come here to talk just about your travel recommendations. I mean, the secondary thing. We came here to talk about internal related stuff, of course, but it's lovely to catch up with you. Hopefully the head cold doesn't affect things too much, but we have a lot to talk about still for today. Of course, there was the ETS and the EC. Did I say that right? ETS? Yeah.
Eternal Tournament Series.
See, the thing is, they talk about both the time zone of EST and then the Eternal Tournament Series ETS, and I always have to double check that I got them in the right order for the T and the S. But anyway, ETS, ECQ, balance changes, event this weekend, a lot of stuff going on. So we're going to launch right into it. And for those of you who are listening at home, we are actually live here on Twitch as well. So if we're taking questions from the audience or anything like that, we will have all of that in the podcast. So that's where that's coming from. I've been streaming a lot more recently, so you can follow me on www.twitch.tv/neonblonde if you haven't done that already, and you'll get notifications when you go live doing things like this. But I also figured out some stuff that I think that we should be able to be pretty good at managing the sound quality. So while there was a little bit of a decrease in the sound quality from last week, that shouldn't be the case going forward. So we're working on that. The tech is all coming together, but I don't think that'll be an issue this week. So where do you want to start? ECQ, ETS, event, balance changes. What do you want to begin with?
We can start with the tournament results first. Might as well kind of go in order of events here. So we can start on the ETS and jump into the ECQ. These results, even though there are balance changes coming, they're still pretty relevant. So we'll get to how much we actually think these balance changes are going to shake things up. I don't think this is a shake up patch. It's more of a interesting ideas are out there patch. But let's start with the ETS. So I was in the booth for this one. It was a small ETS. Talked about it. We were like, it has too many finishers and it needs a better mid game because Wisdom of the Elders and Amber Acolyte are bad cards to be playing. And we think Moonstone Vanguard is better than Jotun Feastcaller. And this deck literally did all of those things, right? It has Moonstone Vanguard. It's got Jotun Hurlers now to help with its early game. It's playing Smuggler and Merchant rather than Amber Acolyte. It doesn't play Wisdom. It still has Strategize. And now Zalchi and Howling Peak are in the market rather than in the main deck. And the main deck is just Zoe and Heart of the Vault at the top end. Like it took all of those things that we identified and were like, there's obvious room for improvement, and it took those routes for improvement and did very well.
Yeah, and I think that this is interesting because it wasn't just, as you were saying, variations of this kind of thing. There were a lot of experienced players who I kept on saying, it's like, oh, the genetic decks are trash, your genetic decks are trash. They keep on doing well, but just because it just has a pile of these good cards that sometimes draws well, but they're just inconsistent and poorly built anyway. And that really we were just waiting for somebody who could sit down and put in the work and actually grind out of for instance, the Halloween Beaks. You go all the way to the one in the market, or you cut them entirely, or what do you do with that? And Sunnyvale actually put in the work there to do that honing and came up with a list that I think is definitely the first version of the genetic decks. I'm like, yeah, I think this deck is good.
Yeah, this is not a deck now that we can say, oh, we perfected it, it's good, we're done. There's still plenty of room to iterate and evolve, but this is the first big step, I think, in putting it on the map and putting up results and making it feel like a deck that works and plays smoothly, where before it was a real clunker, and that is not the case anymore. I think there's maybe some, especially with the power base, I don't know if we're on the right number of sources of things and right number of power overall. Also, we saw other versions of this deck in the tournament play with slight variations on the number of Moonstone Vanguard versus Jotun Hurler. Also, instead of Ixtun Merchant, we saw the other Smuggler, the Elysian Smuggler, with a slightly different market, which meant which has some ups and downs to it. It means you don't get bored as often, which was a slight problem they ran into. But instead of running Rock Slide, they got to run Torrential Downpour.
Yeah.
And that card is a huge upgrade over Rock Slide. So that's something to keep an eye on going forward as well. It's like, okay, I have to play a 3/3 vanilla instead of a 3/2 overwhelm. How does that compare and things like so? There's lots of little tiny decision points to make, as well as the larger overarching ones. But I think this version of the deck is certainly a lot closer to being near its peak than it was before.
Yeah, I think that what we're going to see from here is basically taking this shell of the deck and then kind of iterating on that. I think that this is the core, though, that you should be starting from. Of where to go. And the market is always a place where there's a lot of room for innovation there, and both market and then merchant choice. It's tinkering, and that it always just kind of looks a little bit just tinkering around the edges, but it makes a big difference. Of the one card in your market can make a really big difference in how various matchups play out, and that's gonna be something that comes up later on.
So that a version of this deck actually top 4 the ECQ, and then it has those that merchant swap I was talking about, where it's got Great Valley Smuggler instead, and it has Torrential Downpour, Caleb's Choice as its low end market rather than Boar and Rock Slide. So it's kind of a trade off there, where Boar is probably better than Caleb's Choice, although Caleb's Choice that counter spell angle is actually came up quite a bit, especially now with Reanimator being back on the map and things like that, where it's a really useful tool to have in your market, and it can still take out relics here and there. So that'll be fun to see where the majority of players end up on with that list.
Yeah, that definitely is going to matter a good deal for it. So I think that's something that we'll wait for talk about that like when we get to the actual ECQ, because it's definitely really important. I think of how it will affect the meta going forward.
Yeah, we'll go deep on Reanimator, or at least relatively deep for this episode. I think.
Yeah. So the next deck that got second place was the Grenadins deck. This is the Winchester Grenadins deck. This is something that I've seen on ladder a little bit here and there. It's never really impressed me. Sell me on this deck. Can you sell me on this deck?
I mean, I like Grenadin's deck, but the Justice Splash at first, I was like, is this really worth it? Oh, you're getting Crown Watch, Press Gang, Slay. Yeah, like those aren't worth splashing for. The big gain is the Display of Ambition.
Yeah,
that's the card that like really stood out as like, oh god, like yeah, I get to buy back Stone Scar Scrapper and Gear Cruncher in this game's like over. Like you are just grinding people to death. But it's a little tricky to get to that grindy spot. And this power base is, again, kind of weird. Like 3 Justice Sigils when you only need 1 Justice Source and stuff like that. Like, wasn't quite sure how they ended up on some of these numbers. Notably, Grenadins had won the previous ETS, but that was Witching Hour style Grenadins, where this is a little bit, I guess, as a little more formidable of an early game, but not really still. It just has Slay, and I don't think Slay is that big of a gain for Grenadins, honestly. Or the Press Gang. Like, Press Gang can only get Grenadin drones. So it really is just about Display of Ambition. And is that worth the splash? And is there a better way to justify the splash than just Press Gang and Slay? I think that would be my next step here, is figuring that out. Like, is there some other Justice card that they didn't include here that I would be interested in trying to figure out? They're still playing an Ixton Merchant rather than a Smuggler, but you need to, because Gear Cruncher in the market is really important for this deck. So you're not really gaining anything there either by going with the splash. So I don't think I'm doing a great job of selling you, but
no, you're not. I'll agree with you. You're really not.
Yeah, because I'm not doing a great job of selling me. I think where the metagame's going, adding that over-the-top grindy angle of Display of Ambition is not where I want to be. I don't think that's putting you that much more over the top than Witching Hour already was doing for you.
Yeah, because I think that my issue here, especially, I mean, maybe one of the things that is the bonus that you kind of get is that you're playing the Fire Merchant, which the Nixon Merchant, which means that you can, cycle shows in your deck, but that just does not. I don't buy it as a thing. I mean, I guess you could put the Fire Merchant and show into a traditional Grenadin's deck, and that might be a bit of an improvement over the Witching Hour. That sounds like a long shot, though. I don't know. I still don't get it.
Crown Watch Press Gang, like, is it even an upgrade over Scrap Tank? Like, Scrap Tank getting huge was actually important for the Grenadin's deck, especially when backed up by Dizo's Office, which this deck is not packing. So you do lack those angles that I enjoyed from the Grenadin's deck, where sometimes you just have this huge beater, and this deck, like, the Zoe is almost always getting killed in this deck because the only other big target you have is a 4 Scrapper.
Yeah.
Where at least in that Grenadin's deck, like, they had to deal with the Scrap Tanks at some point with either a Vanquish or a Permafrost, and that's not really the case with this list.
Yeah, Basuna Buffoon, it is closer to a Rider stream we'll get in 2019, though. Yeah, there it is.
The year is still young.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
So, yeah, I definitely think that I'm waiting for somebody to convince you, like, give me a real argument for this, and I haven't yet got it, so we'll just leave it for there. Sono playing a Winchester deck that is a pile of very solid cards. I'm not going to go into details about the variations of building these decks. I think that there's a lot of different ways to do it that are all good. The particular version here, like, interesting things to notice is playing the Lost Scroll. I'm not a huge fan of that necessarily, but, I mean, it's fine.
Yeah. This fell mid-range list from Jennison is... I'm a big lover of Feln. This deck was a little tough to watch for me in spots.
Yeah, I was watching this one too.
The 4 Feast Caller, 4 Champion of Cunning, Black Star, I love that. And then the 2 Vara every time was just hurting them so much.
Yeah, it's just
The removal suite was kind of a mess too. Extract making another appearance, not for Vara's favor, is just obscene to me. Like that will get you in my doghouse very quickly if you're playing Falna, not playing for Vara's favor. So,
like,
but I will give kudos for the Diaz's Office Island Rising Storm wombo combo.
Oh yeah, sure.
That was great. I was all about that.
I still need to actually try Island the Rising Storm. Like, she's one that I've played against her a couple of times, and she's honestly impressed me. Like, she wins the game, closes things out really well.
12 health is a real number. Like,
it's a lot.
When that shows up, it's like, wait, that's her health? It's 12? Like, it's still weird every time I see it.
Yeah, like, she just, like, eats a show. Like, that's a great summon effect.
Yeah.
So I think...
Oh, yeah. Six is a lot. I mean, you're paying one less for a slightly better what's that Sentinel's name? I don't remember. But the one thing that throws me off of the island is I just keep thinking she has flying and she doesn't.
Oh my god, she doesn't have flying. I never realized. I literally did not know until right now, because the other two did.
Yeah, so it's like a massive deal breaker for me. I'm just like, I'm not paying 8 for this unit with no evasion at all. And yeah, it's like, I don't care that she has pledge or whatever.
I mean, she's got evasion in the sense that when she attacks 3 times, she does 12 to everything. That's
the
a form of evasion. The third time, yeah.
The third time, yeah. No, I need some sort of battle skill on her, and she just comes with none. I don't know. I'm out on it.
Yeah, I can. It's definitely not a card that I have. Like, it's done some stuff I need to be convinced on still, though. I'm still not gonna pull the trigger on it quite yet. Yeah, this is a little bit interesting of a build. I don't really get it exactly of like what's the appeal of this particular version of the deck, but it happens.
Yeah, it was real funny to watch this deck run into Greedidans in the top 8 and just Urn of Choking Embers completely shut down Feln, which is weird to think about.
Yeah, that was something that when I was watching it, because I do on like usually Sundays or Mondays nights, I do a review of the ETS and the ECQ like content that came out, because I just like to be able to watch the decks, like talk through it with people. It's really useful for me to like learn a lot about the format through doing that. And when they first people like the Grenadin's deck was just blind grabbing Urn on turn 3 when playing out the merchant, and I'm like, really, is that actually like the correct thing to be doing here? And then over the course of the games, it was like, yeah, it looked really good.
It justified that one card that you gave up for it. Like, no doubt about it. It was popping Aegis left and right, letting you push through damage in certain spots. It did a lot of work, a lot more work than I expected in that matchup. Because I was on the same page. Like, that seems kind of cute, but Grenadin struggles to pop Aegis. It really does. So having that relic just sit there in play, especially against Feln that really can't remove it unless they want to burglarize it for some reason, was a really nice little advantage that they found, because you can get that Urn into play before their 5 drops start coming down anyways, and then they're just really easy to clean up and make sure Madness an actual real card, where if you're not popping Aegis, it's so hard to make that card work.
Skycrag Aggro, next deck on the list here. Pretty standard stuff. The only thing that I would note is the Ankle Cutter that is 3 of in the main deck, which is kind of interesting. Yeah. We got to do another interesting one in the ECQ, so let's save that for then, but I think that's a pretty remote deck. We have another edition of the Sunnyvale Genev deck, played by Tovu. Then Krendin Reanimator. I did not take a look at this deck.
Yeah, that deck is, they call it Reanimator, but it's not a Reanimator deck.
Oh, it's just
they're not
ramp.
They're not actually playing
Shadows. They're one Reanimator.
One Vara.
One Vara. That makes it a Reanimator. Okay, yeah,
one Vara in the market. So it's really just
ramp
good
control
stuff pile with harsh rule in it, sort of thing, like Lost Scroll ramp rule kind of deck. But
sure,
all of the units draw cards is sort of the idea. The Crown Watch Press Gang makes the cut here for Dire Fang Spider.
That is hard to swallow. That is...
Yeah, I'm not sure that's the one drop I would go to when I have 3 different factions available, especially. I mean, now you could talk me into maybe Enchanter or whatever now with the buff. That's a fun one to tutor up. But,
Yeah, there's like a... Yeah, there's I don't know. This is just a deck that is like...
that's not a deck I'm playing.
No.
It's not a deck I'm playing.
This requires some... I mean, I think I've always thought that there's like got to be something like this in these faction combinations.
Yeah.
Maybe this is a deck that just requires a little bit more work, but it's...
There's some cool ideas going on here. Like Mystic Ascendant plus Dizo's Office is a pretty sweet like combo of just like, oh, Ascendant's getting big and now I can swing with it, and it's like just big units with Dizo's Office is a synergy. So something to look at. We haven't seen a lot of Mystic Ascendant decks lately. There's just better things to empower now, like killing opponents' units and things like that. But I think that's still an intriguing combination there.
I find it hard to believe that you want 4 Mystics and 3 Moonstone Vanguards. Moonstone Vanguard has been so good for me.
Yeah, no, I love Moonstone Vanguard. That card is wonderful. So, and yeah, so it's kind of a good stuff pile. It did fine, didn't do great. I think
Maybe there's something there.
There might be some good ideas here, but yeah, don't calling it the mid part of mid animator is more important thing here. But again, it's playing partial. So how mid range is it really?
And then finally, we have another version of the Genev deck. This looks pretty similar to the other one, so we can just move on from here. There might be some minor card choice differences, but I can't really see them, obviously. From there, we can talk about the ECQ. The winner of the ECQ was GT100. Congratulations to them playing the Stone Scar Grenadins deck, making Lights Out Ace proud. And the boxer as well. Like there's a few people who are like really champions of this deck that's just like saying, it's underrated. People are not respecting me. It's really, really good. I think part of the reason is just like it's a bunch of dorky units. So there's kind of part of you that's like, yeah, like how good could it really be? Seems like it just ties to Hailstorm, but no, it's just a really solid deck.
Stone Scar Scrapper is the truth, man. That really card is obscene, and it should probably be seeing more play than in just Grenadins. Honestly, like I think there is room to figure out even some other grindy decks to play it out in, even if you don't have like the life gain going on with it. It's something to explore. That card is just so good. And yeah, the rest of the deck's doing strong stuff too. You can always just end up being a Grenadin beatdown draw sometimes and just back it up with Madness as a burn spell. Like it's really good at switching gears of it. Or not good, but occasionally it just does switch gears at you. It might not be that you wanted to, but it happens. And there is that risk where you have 3 Witching Hour and 4 Gear Cruncher that you just have absolute stone cold hands, but they don't show up too often. It's pretty tolerable. So yeah, it's putting up results, and I think the Dizo's Office in the market was the real
that was a good one.
That impressed me when Grenadins put up great results a couple weeks ago, and it impressed again in this go around here, where those scrap tanks now, again, big unit plus Dizo's Office. It's not really a combo, but it really matters when you just, even if you chump block this 2020 scrap tank, you're just gaining all of this life and buying yourself a lot of time, which is what this Grenadin deck wants and needs to do. It's going to go longer and stronger than basically any other deck out there, other than maybe some of these really crazy reanimator lists.
I think that the one of the things that's underappreciated by of this style of deck, in my opinion, is how skill intensive they are, or the practice really pays off for it. Because the people who have like done well with these consistently tend to be people that I've seen who are aficionados of that deck. Like people all know that there have been times that nobody else is playing on the ladder, and then Lights Out Ace is just hanging out in the top 100 or whatever it is with the deck. It is something that, because like as you're saying about the deciding what your plan is at any given moment, is really important for this. Or like for instance, your market decisions are really important, because especially when you have things like Madness Combust, you want to know when is it important to keep that combo together, or assemble it, ignore it, like whatever it is there. So I think that there's a lot of to that, and part of the reason why maybe a lot of other people aren't taking the deck quite as seriously, because they're just not seeing the same results. That's just because they just don't know the deck as well.
Mm-hmm.
Avignon is the second place finisher. They were playing a wind chest deck, the Fire Justice Shadow, of course, and some of the interesting things to note: 4 harsh rules in the main deck, that coming back. And I think that is something that we're going to see a lot more of in the coming days for reasons that we're going to get to in one of the later lists.
Yep, 4 harsh rule down to 6 smugglers here. Full 4 display, only 3 Rizon, and then 2 Dizo's Office making an appearance there in the main deck. I think if you are on harsh rule, it makes a lot of sense to up your site count rather than just have only the Regent's Tomb, even though the smuggler into tomb into harsh rule curve is fine, especially if the tomb is giving Swear Vengeance to one of your smugglers. Like, that's a pretty cool way to make that harsh rule feel not quite as awkward in that curve out. So it does fit in well with that curve where we've seen some of these other FJS decks. They don't have that natural follow up all the time to the turn 4 Regent's Tomb. So other than just like dump more removal onto the board. So yeah, this deck has a ton of removal, and it just tries to grind it out. But some of the decks are going to be able to out grind it is sort of the issue here. Like, yeah, you have a Martyr's Chain and 4 Zhou, but outside of that, you don't have a whole lot going for you. Now, this deck does make the adjustment of having the Cauldron Cookbook in the market. So that does help out a bit, but it's not always going to make up the difference, especially with how many relic answers are out there right now. Like, everybody's packing a Boar, some other destructions, and you only have 1 Chains, 1 Cookbook. You've got to hope one of those survives, and even then, it's not always going to be enough.
I keep on being surprised by people. I'm just looking right now at the list, and there's a comment about it. Say, I'm not talking or anything, but just curious, how is Rizon still good? I keep on being surprised people having this sentiment to me, because like I played the Winchester deck in the ECQ. I got into the top 64. Lost to a deck that we'll be talking about very shortly. Keep on prefacing this because I think it's a really important deck. But it's like Rizon did so much work in so many different situations and so many matchups.
Yeah.
It's good against Grenadins because it's a flying threat and you need something like that to get through in the air, especially since Show is much more vulnerable to just madness than the Rizon. Then,
the summon still hits sites, which is really big. It's really not that hard to get 6 spells. I think that's why they doubled it. Like, especially if you look at this build: 4 Defiance, 4 Seek Power, 4 Torch, 3 Lost Scroll, 4 Quarry. That's just 2 cost or less spells right there. And then that's not even counting you're normally getting Regent's Tomb on 4. That's usually going to cast at least 2 spells. Generally, sometimes it'll get all 3 out. So it's easy to discount these sites, but they can dump a lot of spells into your void quickly as well. So it's still not that hard to get 6 spells for Rizon, especially in a harsh rule deck. Or hey, Cookbook too. Get those fire bombs going. So this style especially, not shocked to see Rizon there. Only as a 3M, not the full 4, but I think that's fine. We have seen some versions of this deck cut him out, and I think now you can at least in certain builds maybe justify it. I'm still not totally sold on that because he's still just so good in my eyes. But maybe if you're not on this defensive Defiance version, you could go without Rizon. But then I think you're probably on the wrong version of FJS because I think just Defiance is a pretty strong card right now.
Yeah, Defiance, I definitely think that playing less than 2 Defiance in this version of the deck is asking for trouble. The aggro decks are getting much better, and they're feeling like they've learned that, like, we can get away with a lot more now that Rizon is less powerful and less consistent of having that lifesteal effect. And like, I guess my thing with Rizon is that there's been a bunch of times where I'm against something like the Rakano decks. The Rakano decks are really good right now. They're really, really powerful, and especially when they have things like charging units as a result of the Highland Sharpshooters with it. It's like you need to get your life total high. You can't just expect to, like, okay, I stabilize at 4 life and the game's just over because I've taken control of the game. It's like, no, because they can just charge you with a giant unit and a pump spell, and you're dead immediately with that. So
Yeah.
having something that having both the Boros and the results to get your life total back to a respectable number is, in my opinion, a really important part of the game plan.
Yeah. Ultimately, though, I think for me, if I'm building FJS, I'd still rather just have harsh rule in the market and main deck like maidens. I think that build is a little more appealing to my play style. Although that I do love a good Dizos office, so I do see the appeal of going this 4 harsh rule office kind of thing. But I don't know if Dizos offices really do that much in FJS. I think a little more impressive in time decks or the Grennin's deck, things like that. I don't think FJS really needs that effect.
Well, that actually brings us to the next deck, which I call Xenon Sightseer. This is a Xenon deck, as you might expect from the name, and it is playing a full 9 sights. 3 Praxis Arcanum, 4 Xenon Temple, and 2 Dizos Office. I don't know if you've had a chance to either watch this deck or play this deck yet, but I was actually playing this on stream yesterday. And
this looks sweet.
Sorry?
This looks sweet.
There's some really sweet stuff, I think, going on in this deck. There are other elements of the deck that I have big problems with.
Yeah, like the removal.
But my big thing is I really am pretty convinced that Arcanum is bad. I just like it is something that is a card that is so polarized of when you're ahead versus when you're behind. It does a terrible job of defending itself, and it just stone nothing. Like when you are behind, like your opponent, especially an aggressive deck, can just ignore it entirely and just kill you and not be worried about being punished for basically.
It's also just a really awkward deck for it. Like I don't think I'd want to. It's like, oh, I'm reducing the cost of my units and relics. I'm going to put in a bunch of sites into my. It's just does not quite seem to be taking advantage of the thing you'd want to take advantage of on Arcanum. I could see some decks maybe making it work as that one off in the market to, turn 3 market for something or you market for it, turn 4 you put it into play like we've seen from the Argenport site, and then go from there and do some bust things. But I don't think main decking it is really the way to go with this card.
Yeah, so that was one that stuck out to me as a problem. But also, like, ultimately, a lot of the rest of the deck, there's some good stuff here. To be totally honest, I was really impressed by Musa Vanguard. I mean, we were talking about this a bunch. It was really strong.
Oh yeah,
Dizos Office,
giving that card killer and then Dark Returning it. You win the game. You win the game.
Yeah, and it's something that the Xenon Temple is very good right now. I think that the big problem here is I'll actually just begin talking about it right now. Is the Reanimator deck that is it actually beat it in the top 8. I have no idea how. We didn't see the first game of the match, but I just don't get it of how this deck was able to win a full series against the Reanimator deck, because that matchup seems abysmal. But
yeah, Xenon Temple's only stealing units when they die, not when they get discarded.
That is a huge deal in this matchup, in my mind. It's one of the things that turns that matchup into pretty bad to kind of just irredeemable. So
yeah. Maybe this deck can just pressure Reanimator hard enough with that early Teacher of Humility, if that can connect.
I mean, obviously
it shuts down their market pretty hard then at that point, and you can then get under it.
Obviously, I think there are draws that you have that, but it's you just have no control over that. It's you either have the Teacher in your opening hand with the power to cast it on turn 2, and you're on the play, or you don't. Part of the thing too is that connecting with Teacher is really hard. They play so many dirtily idiots to block it and just buy time for it that they can at the very least dependably okay, well, I'll jump block it on turn 1, play my merchant on jump block it on turn 2. On turn 3, I play my merchant and I get my Grasping of Shadows. Now I don't really care about the cost of amplification anymore because it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm. This is a deck I would be interested in maybe trying to work in Dawnwalker.
Yeah,
I think
it's close to that.
We haven't seen Dawnwalker in a while, and I could see just cutting these 3 Praxis Arcanums for 3 Dawnwalker and being like, what does this deck do now?
There's definitely a lot to do with this deck. I think that this is right now a bit of an underexplored archetype for it, but definitely for Xenon Temple to Diesel's Office, feels like a pretty interesting mix of stuff that requires some serious attention.
Yeah, this is cool.
You're like it really looks like the gears are turning.
Well, it's Xenon, so yeah, the gears are turning. It's also not playing Ion, which is always like a eyebrow raise sort of moment. Like maybe a Martin Stinger is worth playing over Ion, but I will continue to raise my eyebrows about that. Yeah, it's some cool stuff. I would maybe look at playing around with this deck if I knew I wasn't going to start playing around with Wisp decks the second I boot up Eternal again.
Yeah, so that is for that deck. Very well done for Stormblast as well, getting to the top 4 rather, but not into that top 2 slots.
Let's get to the main course.
Yeah. Let us get, because Julius's deck, that's the other one in the top 4. We've seen that one already. That is the Janev deck, Isomorphics Reanimator deck. This is I am writing an article on this deck right now. I've been playing basically like this was the deck that I played against in the first round of the ECQ, and it was really interesting testing for the matchup because initially, like in the first couple of games, I was like, "Oh, it doesn't seem like that bad," and then I played against Iliac playing this deck, who had already spent some time playing the deck, and he just worked me, like just absolutely worked me, and I was like, "Oh crap! Somebody who actually like really knows this deck really well can dominate Winchest." And it does. It is an abysmal matchup for Winchest. And so after that happened, and I got into the actual like ECQ, lost in 2 games, and ever since then, I've been just like thinking about this deck because it is so interesting and so well built.
Yeah, this deck is doing it's doing almost 0 fair things. It's doing just absolute broken nonsense, and it has an okay fair game to start anyways. It's got all of these 2-drop dorks that just gum up the ground between Sporefolk, Master Cartographer, and Back Alley Delinquents. And sometimes those with merchants, you can sort of just beat down other decks that are flailing around. It's very weird how you can kind of pressure with them. Mm-hmm. And then the top end, the Holy Trinity, Black Sky Harbinger, Zindel Revealed, Vera, Fate Touch, probably my 3 like favorite cards in the game, and they just work in incredible synergy.
They have a synergy. Let me tell you,
because we talked about Vara gets back a Zindel. Like everybody figured that piece of the puzzle out. By the way, you can't cast a Zindel in this deck. That is not a backup plan, but this deck has a million ways to discard him, so no big deal. You get back a Zindel, you get back 2 extra things, and if those 2 extra things are 2 Black Sky Harbingers, you're now drawing 2 cards and like wiping out half of your opponent's board and gaining 1 billion life. And from there, you're off to the races.
Like, one of my
to assemble
favorite experiences in Eternal has been milling out my opponents in the Reanimator mirror with the like recurring the Black Sky Harbingers with like multiple Zindels in play. Like, because it's actually hard to kill your opponent in that matchup because you're both like your ground is entirely saturated with bullshit. And then you have your Black Sky Harbingers that are gaining a bunch of life for it. But milling out your opponent is actually totally realistic for it. So that has been really fun. Like, this deck, like, I could go off. This is why I wrote a whole article about it, because I can, talk about this deck a lot, because I think there's a lot of innovations here. Things like playing the Privilege of Rank just as this card advantage, like, engine thing.
It's not the first time we've seen that happen, but it's insane.
It's better in this deck than I've seen in any other deck, is the way to put it, because you really just are like, you crave those extra cards so badly because you're just like you're milling and discarding, etc.
It makes it easier for you to go into the backup plan of hardcast things, where that was often the problem with other Reanimator strategies, was like you just get stuck at 5, and it was really hard to break through to 6, 7, 8 power to get to they're holding up counter spells. I need to now shift into a hard cast, big stuff, mid range. It was really hard for other non-privileged versions of Reanimator to shift those gears. You'd have to give up something somewhere because you're just doing all this discard. This deck does not struggle that issue basically whatsoever because of the privilege. I would not go as far to say this is the best privilege deck, but it's up there. I think the busted Rakano decks that we saw when they
Answer
were
the
at
call.
their peak.
Answer the call decks.
Yeah, when answer the call and you could discard privilege to either answer or to your Rakano 2 drop to your Bullet Shaper.
Yeah.
That was probably still the best privilege of ranks decks, but this one's like on that level, which should tell you something in terms of how ridiculous this card is. Like, again, this deck has no justice spells at all. It is just 5 justice sigils and privilege of rank just to generate more cards, which it needs to discard and do other things with. It even has the full 4 Herald Song. Like, this deck is all in on discarding stuff. Like, normally you don't see quite this many discard outlets, but for this deck it works. It's not even playing the full 4 Nocturnal Observer. It just wants those 2-cost ones instead. And it was working out well for him. Of course, the real MVP of this deck is the one we haven't mentioned yet, and that's Back Alley Delinquent.
Oh my god, boy! My boy! People have been telling me. People have been telling me all about how Harsh Rule just wrecks this deck. Can you explain to them? Can you please explain to them why that card is like merely okay?
Yeah, Harsh Rule's not a fast spell, so that means you can sabotage.
I noticed.
So yeah, unless you have 2 Harsh Rules in your hand, and even then it might not work out for you, because that's what Back Alley Delinquent. It's sometimes going to take your counter spells if you're holding them up, but most of the time it's just like, oh yeah, that's a nice Harsh Rule you have there. I'm just going to grab it because the Back Alley Delinquent on the front end will take out the permission, and then it dies to whatever. And then when you do your Vara, Azindel, Black Sky, whatever chain, one of the extra things you can get is Back Alley Delinquent back. It's a summon effect. You just discard another card and you cast your Sabotage and be like, oh, okay, your Harsh Rule's gone.
Yep.
You don't even have to worry about them having a face Aegis because your Black Sky Harbinger to help like pop that on the same turn. It's so like the Back Alley Delinquent is the card that they need to put in their void or make sure it's not in your void, because the Vara recurring that card is like the actual most important part of this deck. It makes this deck resilient to so many answers because Sabotage deals with all of them.
Yeah. So a couple of the points from chat. One of them, these are both from actually Zubafoon, I think are really good. I had to Madness Combust Delinquent yesterday so that they could get another Sabotage.
Yeah.
So Madness saying it and then doing that makes a lot of sense. The other thing that he said is whenever I think I'm smart, I remember Isomorphic exists. And that really shows it off in this deck. This is like honestly, I think it's been a long time since I've seen a deck that is this well built and this like kind of innovative in some of the stuff that it's doing and different risks that it's taking. And I mean, I'm not going to go off too much more about it because I have a whole article that's coming about it because I just love this deck that much. But
yeah, there are plenty of decks out there where I'll nitpick and be like, maybe the power base could be better. You didn't think this choice through here. Maybe and with this one, it's every spot makes perfect sense. You see where once it's in action, especially, it all clicks into place. It's like, okay, maybe 4 Suffocate's not the right number in a certain meta games, but you can always change that. But like 4 is the max amount of removal spells you want in a Reanimator deck. Like
he gets it.
I never.
We're a combo deck. We are here
Yeah.
to combo off. I'm not here to play fair. Removal spells are for pedestrians.
Yeah, put full on interaction in the market with a grasping. Like, yep, that's fair. You don't need a Vara or an Azindel or any of those pieces in there because you're trying to maximize your Spore Folk efficiency. So all of the decisions make total perfect sense. It's a very, very wonderful deck.
Yeah, the only thing that I would gripe about actually is some of the market, like the Annihilate, Brenda's Choice, and Felon Banner. I could all imagine those changing at some point in the future. So if you're somebody who wants to like work on this deck and innovate on this deck, I would focus on the main deck. I pretty much think that like maybe you can change like things like the number of Nocturnal Observers versus Cartographers, but other than that, I really just like wouldn't touch basically anything about the main deck.
Yeah, and maybe the strategize count, maybe.
Yeah,
but,
things like just very, very subtle changes that would be barely noticeable. The place that would make a difference is if you can come up with something in the market that's like a really good, amazing plan. That could be a big deal.
Yeah, it is pretty funny how like Herald's Song was slowly getting pushed out by other better discard outlets. And then the advent of merchants made it so much more valuable again, where it's just like, oh, these are 2 cards. I can put one of these in and get a real card. Great.
Yeah.
So yeah, beautiful deck. Could end up being a problem. It's certainly something to keep an eye on.
I am pretty sure.
Goes.
I am pretty sure that Direct Digital has the rise in this deck.
This might be the straw that at least breaks Privilege of Rank's back. Privilege of Rank is a card that got nerfed before. Nobody was really around for it. There were very few. It used to just create the Justice Sigils. You didn't need to have them in your deck.
Oh yes, I remember this now.
So it was a card that was nerfed once before, and that trust me, if this deck didn't have to play Justice Sigils, it would be that much better. But they could end up having to hit it again in some fashion. I would not be too surprised if that gave it some sort of threshold that you already need, like a Justice Source in play or something like that. I would not be like too surprised if they at least gave it another little slap on the wrist. But other than that, we'll see. Yeah, there was risk in letting Vara back out of her cage, and I'm fine with that. You know, everybody's having fun for now, but we'll have to see where it goes.
Yeah, with this, the thing that I would definitely say is that I've already noticed a big change in the metagame. I mean, like, I guess they're kind of like some subtle ones in terms of how things have rearranged. Definitely there's been more aggro since this came out, because like obviously a deck that can kill you by the time that you get to that turn 5, or really punish you if you don't have that turn 5, super mega grasp. That's a very big problem for this deck. So I think that's a really appealing part of the strategy to exploit. The other thing is the use of Adjudicator's Gavel in the market of Justice decks. That is, it is a really big deal for it. Like, you do have Burglarize to play around that, but that basically means that you have to play out the Merchant, you have to play Burglarize afterwards. That's a 7 power investment to take care of this card, and especially if that Justice deck has you under a clock, under the time they know they can just go, right? So that's and you can't even like plan B them of get the 8 mana bar or something like that. It's not like it just turns off Grasping at Shadows. It turns off like your entire engine. So it also turns off Privilege of Rank too. Interesting little note there in case people don't know it. So those are some of the adjustments I'm kind of seeing as a result of this.
My adjustment to this deck, if I thought it was like somehow reached 50% metagame share and the other 50% was aggro decks, I would break out Deadliest Coach, because you can sabotage a Harsh Rule. You can't sabotage a Deadly Black Sky Harbinger. So
it's true.
Snip, snap. Easy wins all day.
Very nice.
Take them to the cleaners. So that's where my mind, that nobody else's mind should go, goes. So there we go.
So,
but yeah, sweet deck, no doubt.
Looking at the rest of the top 8, interesting to note that Thalion's deck in the top 8 is a Skycrag Yaze deck. And this is something I've seen on Ladder. I've seen it. I think there were a couple copies of this in the ECQ top 64. Deck is really solid. It is doing some powerful stuff. The fact that Pock synergizes with Howling Peak Smuggler super well on 2 fronts too. A, get some tissue damage with the snowballs. B, you can throw the snowballs into the market if you don't need them. And the Pock is a great card to sacrifice to Vara, which is obviously a problem card for this deck if you don't have the Permafrost. Yeah. So this does a lot. I really think that this is a surprisingly good deck, because I think that people usually associate Yetis as being just a meme. This deck is pretty terrifying.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I'm not sure if it's better than just straight Skycrag, though, because you're essentially swapping Ankle Cutter for Fearless Yeti. I could take it or leave it there, just because, as you said, Vara can be such an issue in other lifesteal and endurance units. So having Ankle Cutter around for those matchups is really useful, but you can't hate on Chunk, and obviously Wump is the big X factor there. Again, is that combination of cards better than Vadius right now? Not sure, but I do like that this is a deck that can just generate a lot of pings and a lot of reach without like in a board stall. It actually has a shot at still finishing the game, where your typical Skycrag decks are like, okay, I'm going to draw kind of weak burn spells from here on out and hope that I draw enough of them to close it off, where this deck can find a little more reach reliably. Yeah,
I'm interested to see where this goes. I think that this is a little bit better against a metagame where you're expecting things like Vara specifically for it. It just feels like you are able to do things like having the chunk as a part of that plan too, because it allows you to get in that extra damage. So it's a little bit less staying power than the other deck too, because you are losing Vadias. That's an important tool, but I definitely like where this is going, and interested to see if this is in fact a good way to pursue the format.
I always love Island's Intervention, though. None of these Yetis deck ever play that card. It makes me sad because I love that card to death. So, but I realize that card is kind of meta dependent. Like right now, Hailstorm's not seeing much play, so and neither are flying units. So why play it? But
yeah,
I still anytime I play with Island's Intervention, I'm still always like blown away by how versatile and useful that card is.
Yeah. So with that, how about we then move on to talk about the balance changes that were just announced, of course. Rest of the were cards were decks that we already talked about in varying ways. Congratulations to all the players. But we have some balance changes that were announced yesterday that are coming into effect today and have a lot of fun little neat additions and changes to the format. So let's go through those.
All right, let's go. Let me bring up this list. So these are fun balance changes.
Yes, largely
because they're all buffs. The buffs are fun. So says everybody. So let's start with just the straight up stat buffs here, because that's how they have it ordered. Lou Death Dreamer is now a 3/6 instead of a 2/5 for 5. Still a weird build around card, right? Some of these stat buffs make a lot of sense because they're like, oh yeah, they're more resilient. And going from 5 to 6, I guess does make her more resilient. I'm just not sure if that was really her issue of like, oh, I cast a Lou and she died to X. It's like, no.
Her gun down weakness. That was the big thing that was holding her back.
Yeah, so it's like she still costs 5, and then your payoff is getting lots of 3/3s at the mid to late stages of the game, and I'm just not really there. Did we even get any like new cheap curses that I'm like stoked to play with her like in the last?
No. Like the last good curse that we got was Curse of Winter, right? Or actually the it's the teacher one, the disciplinary weights. Technically counts.
Yeah, I guess that might work out. I'm not sure. So, I mean, we got Urn of Choking Embers and Agitator's Gavel. It's not really ones that we're like
going off,
laying on thick. And Avagraph just got nerfed, so that hurts her a bit. Maybe if we were living in a world where Avagraph was its old self.
Avagraph costs 3 on the condition that you have 4 Alu in your deck. How does that sound?
Something like that. That could maybe work out. Yeah, I don't know. Not quite there. So
no.
Yeah, rough times for Lou.
Yeah, I'm not feeling that one. Next is the Black Hall. What's the name? Black Hall Warlord Leader. Let me just pull up this card because I do not remember all the text on it.
I remember seeing Black Hall Leader for the first time and being like, oh, it's Lethrai Ranger with worse upside.
When Black Hole War Leader hits the enemy player, increase her Inspire by +1/+1, and she gets +1/+1. Inspire, units you draw get +0/0. You really have to connect with this one. I mean, if you connected with it once,
the difference between a 2/2 and a 2/3 is huge.
Yeah,
I'll give it that.
For connecting, against certain types of things.
It's now not as embarrassing of a card. Before it was just bad. Like there was just no reason to play it. Now there's still basically no reason to play. But
yeah,
what can you do?
It
is a Minotaur. I'll give it that. But save your shift stone, folks.
Yeah, people are just like waiting, like you pull the trigger on that one, dump it all.
Yeah, it's certainly closer to playable now. Words. Before it really was like unplayable. Like genuinely, I think Lethrai Ranger outclassed it in every way, other than the fact that it wasn't a Minotaur, I guess. But Beacon Elf was better anyway, so sure.
Yep. Yeah, let's go to Governor now. Governor has gone to a 3/4 in size. Now, for those of you who do not remember,
This is
of
a big
course, this is a big one. I'm interested in your justification there. So,
I mean, yeah.
so this is a 4 cost 3/4 now. Once per turn, you may pay 3 and sacrifice a relic to play the top relic of your deck. Now, this means that you probably want to generate relics through effects like the Teacher, or you have the Mesmeric Wisp, or from maybe your market or something like this, so you don't have any small relics in your actual deck. And then the only relics that you do have are things like the Pit, maybe Temporal Distortion, probably Murder Changes. Is definitely the one that I think probably comes to most people's mind for a I don't Knuckle Bones if you want to get really crazy. So yeah, I have a hard time believing that this card is actually good now, but it's slightly less fragile.
Yeah, now you can actually brew with it, and he can stick around. Like going from 3 to 4 is the biggest hurdle for any like health. Like that is the biggest difference.
Oh yeah,
just getting out of Torp and Hailstorm range. So it now hits that point. So now you can play it, and at least he will live a reasonable more amount of time, which is important for a card that is obviously a build around. Like that is what this card is. So having, a Lou, she was a build around, but she already had like 5 health, and the payoff wasn't that good. At least Governor Sahin, like you can do really sweet stuff with, which will at least be satisfying. Again, is he going to break the meta anytime soon? Probably not. That activation's still really expensive. 3 is a lot. You have to sacrifice a relic. There's some real setup costs to it, but now at least if you can set it up, he'll hopefully stick around to see the payoff, where before you just like never did ever.
Next card is Zelia the Bane. This is one that just reminds you, because I remember being so hyped on this card. I remember being so hyped on this card when it first came out, but it's not exactly done very much. 6 cost, Double Shadow Influence. It is now a 4/5. For those who do not remember the text, it is deadly and has Bond. Pay 4 to play a -2, -1 affliction on an enemy unit and give Zelia +2/+1. This has always been a card that just like there's just not quite enough good unseen to put together for a deck like this. I don't know. It's just never really gotten an identity for an unseen deck exactly, because it just feels like you're playing a weird version of either like Huru mid range or Fel mid range, whatever you're trying to build something like this. You're just kind of forcing it to happen when in reality it would be better to just play generically cards.
Yeah, like since she's come out, we've gotten some new unseen, but they've all been like 2 3s for 2 with trinket text. The Lita's Apprentice, Storm Tamer, Operative, Ward Wielder, all those kind of 2 drops, but the rest of the unseens didn't really get bolstered. So you run into these power and influence issues where it's like, I get to play Huru Pacifier into this Double Shadow card and Rindra and Sheltering Rider. It's just still a bit of a mess there, trying to figure out where the real payoffs is. Is Darkveil Agent enough of a payoff still? And if you're playing that, then you're not playing some of these other 2s. But Zelia's cool. She just is usually at her best when time mid-range is good. And right now time mid-range has not been that great, where you're not getting as much value out of her deadly body, and plus now you can just cast Vara. So that puts a bit of a damper on Zelia's awesome like stats and abilities. It's just like, well, if I want a large deadly unit that's like kind of cheap and really effective on a lot of board states, like I don't have to jump through hoops and play Zelia. I can just play Vara Vengeance Seeker.
Yeah, I feel like it's. I mean, I'm just like looking at the various decks that are in the metagame right now against something like the Winchester decks. She is going to die a lot against something like the Reanimator decks. She's kind of just nonsense and slow, like way too slow for those matchups. Against, I guess it'd be fine against Genev if it didn't take an Equivocator or something like this, but then you just kind of have the cost of like needing to set it up. So it all ends up being something that's kind of like. I mean, I hope that I'm wrong. I hope that this changes everything and that it puts her over the edge. But I have a hard time believing that 5 health is the thing that's going to make this card like playable, because I mean, it already had.
That's not really.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's not changing any of the fundamental issues I think you had with her, where her activation is just super expensive and her cost feels a little much. I mean, the big payoff for being unseen isn't really Zelia. It's still Deadly Confrontation. That card is wonderful. So that it's still like the card that's pushing you into unseen. And Zelia might be all right, but I'm not totally buying it even with this buff. But hey, I mean, a lose better now too. You can combine those and make 3/3s for 4. I guess
something
go nuts,
something like that.
Yeah.
Now we have some changes to Radians and Wisps. We have now.
Did we talk about Name Taker? How that's going to shake everything up?
I didn't. I totally skipped that card. My main impression with Name Taker is having gotten a bunch of them as my premium legendaries for the month. That is my main experience with the card, and it has made me a little bit sour on it. It doesn't exactly do a whole lot that is interesting or compelling.
Yeah, 8-cost silver bullets are not the most efficient, but it's a little bit harder. It kills a few more things, survives against a few more things, but yeah, not really a big deal either. Again, these are all pretty safe buffs. Is really the thing where there could be some real fun upside, but there's not much downside to a lot of these changes.
Oh yeah, I think the main objective here was to just say it's like, okay, let's give brewers like the local Pojo aficionado types something to mess around with, and maybe they can put together a deck that was barely playable before and is now like kind of okay. So it's a little bit easier to play this kind of deck. Your win rate is goes up from 35% to 40%, and that's. I mean, most of the competitive players are not going to be excited by that, but there'll be a few players who just are happy. It's like I get to mess with this more.
Like those were all buffs to legendary cards, so now it just decreases the feel bads of opening them. Where before they were like straight up unplayable, now they're like a little more glimmer of like, maybe I can make this into a useful thing and have fun with it instead of it just rotting in my collection forever. So there's that aspect as well, where a lot of these buffs are going to have a lot more legs or go further with the casual player base, which they are people too, despite what some out there will have you believe. They are very important because they're the ones usually having more fun than us, right? The worst thing you can do at a card game is get good at it. So it's way more fun to just play a game and have fun, and that's what these cards are leading themselves towards, especially these next two. I'm gonna have fun with these.
Okay, how about you tell us about the next two?
This is gonna get me to start streaming again. I think Dial Digital was tired of me not being around, and the last time I was like on a stream was me beating up Lights Out Ace with my Radiant Wisp deck, and they buffed him. Entrancer now silences 4-cost or less units. It used to be 3-cost or less. This card was already great. It was like one of the best cards in the game.
That's how I would describe it.
Now it hits 4-cost units. Now it's like, oddly enough, this actually is really big for the aggro matchups for Wisp, because now you can hit Highwayman and Queen, and those were like the cards that could sometimes break your early wall that you were forming, because Entrancer could already hit all of the merchants and smugglers, which is really what you did with it was, I'm up against FJS, or I should say what I did with it, because nobody else has been playing this card, where I'm up against FJS, play Entrancer early, silence their smuggler, and now they have like nothing to do for 4 turns, and they just like slay Entrancer, then I bring it back and silence their next thing. But now that hits 4-cost units, I mean, that just opens the floodgates. Now you're hitting in those kind of match. I'm not going to list every 4-cost unit, but trust me, there
are a couple of them.
There are some very good ones. Some of the best. We just talked about Vara ad nauseum and all sorts of things like that. So just a huge, crazy, awesome buff where Entrancer is going to whiff even. It's basically never going to whiff now. Before it whiffed very rarely. Now it basically never whiffs. And now if you recurse, you like get it back with Soulbringer. It's even less likely to whiff then. Mm-hmm. So yeah, pretty sweet change. That's actually a change where if the Wisp deck becomes good, people are really going to hate that they buffed Entrancer. I'm a little surprised that's the card they decided to buff with the Radiant Wisp deck in terms of like other options. Same with this other card. Like Soulbringer was the best reason to play the Radiant Wisp deck, and they buffed it. Where now it gives the Wisp, it brings back +1/+1 rather than +0/0. For me, I think the biggest difference maker for that wasn't necessarily what you would normally bring back with Soulbringer, which was like killer deadly wisps. Like that was a big part of the wisp decks I played, was give a deadly wisp killer, use it to trigger Soulbringer's tribute, bring it back, kill another thing. It being bigger doesn't really matter. The bigger deal for, I think, increasing stats will be now if you get back Mitotic Wisp, it doesn't come back as an 0/3, it comes back as a 1/4, which is actually a pretty big deal for it sticking around, seeing more units die, so that you can start tutoring out your Azindals or whatever. It's just a nice little change to help that aspect of the deck out.
Yeah, if I had to guess, I would say that the Soulbringer buff is the bigger deal of these two. Honestly, I think that it just kind of makes that whole engine more annoying, which I think will be kind of cool. So I think that it's worth taking another look at this deck. I think that it's still a long shot of being top tier constructed, but it's definitely it's worth a little bit of second look because it wasn't that far off before.
Yeah, it's a really fun deck to play with too when it starts going, like when you start chaining your Mitotic Wisp to find more Soulbringers and your Pathlighter has killer, and so does like a Nocturnal Creeper, and you're just wiping out your opponent's board and recursing everything. It gets really, really dirty once it gets to that stage of the game, and it's a fun little thing to navigate getting to that point. So yeah, Wisp are a lot of fun to play with. Highly recommend it, and yeah, I'm going to be entrancing a lot of people. I'm looking forward to that.
Nice. Okay, and then the last set here, we have Ava Islands Elite has gone to a 4-cost 3/4 instead of a 5-cost 4/5. That's kind of interesting because definitely getting those extra cards to send back to the market, that's pretty cool. For it, I've been thinking about doing something like a Kuru mid-range deck with Svetia. Honestly, that seems like pretty interesting to me as a deck that this might fit into something like that. I'm not sure though.
Yeah, the one thing I had to check immediately with Eva was her unit type when I saw this change. She is a Warrior Serpent, so no elf things going on here, which could have been like a super big deal for those elf decks that care about the 4 cost less elves. So no big tribal synergies to exploit. It's more just Eva on her own. She'll still be one of the best draft bombs in the game.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, if you were doing things with Inspire cards, there's also that where those Cloud Snakes picking up random battle skills was always nice. I would consider this, even though she's a bit smaller, I would consider this a buff. I'm not sure what deck wants her. Other 4-cost 3/4 flyers have not particularly seen a lot of play. But the fact that, her tribute's going to be, it's a bit easier to get that going just because she's cheaper. It's easier to combine with effects. And getting a bunch of classics, as you said, that free cards are free cards, man. They are really useful. I typically give them deadly, but not everybody does that. So you can, as you said, just put them in the market, do other things. You can scream her now, but she's not really a great scream target compared to other choices, but it's still something to keep in mind, I guess. And there's probably some other cool synergies or curve outs now that are available that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head. But
I don't know.
Oh, somebody in chat saying Praxis Arcanum, make those Cloud Snakes cost 0. All right.
Well, I mean, then you can also give her that the charge as well. Get that infiltrate in.
Sure.
That's some.
Sure. I don't know if that's winning any games, but you'll get some style points. All right. I can buy it.
Yeah. So okay, so that is that. Lethray hide it away. This is the relic that costs 2. That gives you a 2/1 elf, and then it has a 4-cost activation before it is down to 3 cost. Give one of your elves +2/+0 to end a turn.
Sure.
This is pretty hard to imagine that mattering. To be frank.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's always been just there as a relic to enable your Relic Matters cards as just a 2/1 for 2 with upside, and now it's got slightly easier to access upside with that activation. It is a permanent +2, and some of the L's are recurring each other. So, yeah, I mean, it's just nice little gravy on a card that was seeing some very, very, very fringe play and will continue to see very, very fringe play.
Yep.
A lot of these are just nice little buffs to basically tribal decks. I think the only of these changes so far, I think the Entrancer is like one of the cards that maybe has a shot of breaking out of just tribal synergy decks, just because like Night Maul is a deck, and cheap unit with the silence attached could work its way in there. But a lot of these other ones, not the case. Although maybe these next few cards have no tribal implications going on. They're just cool changes. Like next up is Sleepless Night, which is a card I have cast a lot in my lifetime, and now it costs 7 instead of 8, which is that's a big change. This is not typically the way we've been generating card advantage lately, and I don't know if we'll be switching back to discarding your hand and drawing cards anytime soon, just because we've seen merchant interactions and things like that be the way to generate cards. But it is a big discard outlet, a big draw spell. It's a really fun card to cast. I don't mind it seeing going to 7.
Yeah, this was definitely a card that I remember having lots of fun with it, and like some of the big revenge decks, and lots of other nonsense. But I know that Lights Out Ace as well. I played a ton of this card. It is interesting. It is fun, but it is definitely it feels outdated.
Yeah, it feels outdated. Maybe some sort of ramp deck would want this on its as part of its top end, but right now it's just so much better to cast big impact spells like a Zindel or whatever. Especially now with Vara getting buffed or unlocked again, I could see why this was the problem with Sleepless Night before when Vara was unnerfed. Was why ever play Sleepless Night when you could play Vara was always the question, and that question was back to being as strong as it ever was.
It's a good question.
So now you can point to being like, it's 7 costs, discards a lot of things, draws a lot of things, as you said, the revenge synergies. Don't know if it's going to make it get there, but at least I like this little nudge of like, hey, remember this card? It's pretty cool. And cards like Lost Scroll makes it a little more appealing in terms of dump your hand, refill it, go sort of style could work out. Maybe just even it as a copy in your market. Maybe, I don't know. It's a kind of weird card to put in your market. It might be you'd rather chain it in your deck somehow. But we do have a lot more ramp than we used to, so I could see it perhaps working its way into those decks. We've been seeing Brilliant Idea see some play here and there, and this can fulfill a similar role just in a different faction combination.
Yeah, one of the points that Singularity draws out is that this is now competing with Deezer's Office. Like that's like the thing. With, like the you can't play very much in the way of 7 and 8 drops, and there's a lot of them that are really fucking good. This is just also talking about just the shadow ones. Like you're putting this in Argenport deck, we have Jalute now. You're putting this in a Xenon deck, we have a Zindel now. You're putting this in a fire deck, we have Show now. Like you kind of got the thing here that like all of these other cards have like do really impactful and interesting stuff that is also much more proactive too. So just taking turn 8 or maybe a little bit sooner off to draw a few cards and then hope that it kind of like lines up. Just I have a very hard time believing that this is going to be a tier 1 capable thing unless it can be integrated in something broken. That's always the caveat with a card like this is that like maybe there's something that we're missing that is busted, and in which case like sure, that's cool.
Yeah, Sleepless Night has always had to overcome its own dissonance where a big draw spell would be at its best in control lists, but you can't really play this with reactive cards that you sit on because it would discard them when you cast it or when you draw it again. So you really have to go tap out, but not quite tap out control. And there's just that awkwardness of trying to make it work. That it's seen play here and there, but it's unlikely to see the play that it even used to.
Yeah, no, I think that the only thing I keep on thinking about it is definitely that this is a bit outdated of a card. Then finally we have the Star Reader Severin, we actually have one more after this too. He is the promo card that we had just a few days ago, it feels like. And
it was not long.
Yeah, just like and reducing his cost to 1. The text on that card, to be specific, it is a mage. It has shadow influence, 1 cost now, of course, 2 on shadow, so 5 shadow. When you play a relic, play Severin from your void with +1 attack, exhausted. Okay, so we actually didn't talk about this on the cast yet, but this card has a very serious tension to it that is not addressed at all by the fact that it costs 1 now. The tension with the card is that a lot of shadow influence is really hard to achieve at the same time that you have a relic, because relic cards, there's just very few good mono shadow relic cards that you could be playing. And when you're asking for something that's quadruple or quintuple shadow, you're basically going to be mono shadow.
I think this helps to clarify the deck you want to play Star Eater Severin in, at least, where before it was just a 2/1 for 2 was just not a good enough rate to be like, oh, I'm going to discard it and at least I'll get it back randomly later. And it's like, okay, you got back a 3/1. Now at least it has a very clear deck. Now, whether or not that deck is good doesn't really matter, or it does matter, I guess, for how much it's going to see play. But now it's a 2/1 for 1 with upside and some recursion, where you just put it in mono shadow beatdowns, and you can play Marionette Cross, and you can also play Secret Passage and Rat Cage or whatever. There are some mono shadow relic aggro cards that he'll occasionally come back. It'll occasionally just be a 2/1 for 1, which is fine, and its upside won't be on the level of Oni Running or other 2/1s for 1, but it might approach that and give these mono shadow aggro decks at least something approaching a respectable 1 drop, right? I do love recursive units in any deck, but this one always it has a lot of hoops to jump through to come back. So at least now it's at a respectable base rate where you're not embarrassed to play a 2/1 for 1 in an aggro deck. And when it comes back as a 3/1, hopefully it still continues to have a little bit of impact, help you get a little more reach. But it's a pretty narrow card at this spot, where other recursive threats like Dawnwalker or whatever, you get more value out of just by discarding them and doing other things, and they get back later and they're still relevant. This card's not quite to that level, especially with the relic and shadow influence requirement. It's a really, really, really narrow deck it's going into. And maybe that deck is decent. I mean, I played with mono shadow aggro a bit when Marionette Cross came out. And maybe that deck is at least fine, especially if you're a new player and you just got Star Eater Severin as a promo. That's a deck you could cobble together right now, probably for pretty cheap, and have some fun with.
Man, I just remembered this is now a combo with the sludge. You remember the sludge?
Oh, I love sludge.
Yeah, it's the old sludgy boy.
My boy.
Yeah, you bring back these Star Raider Severins. They're getting the plus attack. You keep on building up those sludgies. We're just reading it all wrong.
No, I'll play with that deck a bit and see where it goes. I think it could be at least kind of cool to play around with. I don't. Although maybe Shadow won't have as much problem finding reach nowadays between Nightfall and everything else. I don't know. Although we'd have to figure out if you're mono Shadow, the merchant's not bringing a whole lot to the table in that archetype either. But
no.
Who knows? I haven't really dug deep. When I saw Severin first spoiled, I didn't start looking through all of my shadow relics and trying to figure things out. But now might be a good time to really start brewing up with my rat cage and all that.
Okay, and then we have a final card. We have the Veteran Mercenary. This is one that I know that you played a decent amount of at various points. How about you give us your thoughts on this, going from a 5-cost 6/4 to a 4-cost 4/4?
This is a buff for most of the monofaction decks. Maybe not the time deck if you were playing Dawnwalker, which you probably were if you were mono time. So yeah, I guess this is cool. A 4/4 for 4 is generally better than a 6/4 for 5. Yeah, sure. I was never the biggest fan of Veteran Mercenary, but I think it's at least of the design space you can explore with a factionless card. I think it's a really smart way to do it. Of like, this is factionless, but it's actually a mono faction card for all 5 factions. I think that's really, really sweet. So if we end up seeing a little bit more of it, this has not been a good time to play mono faction. That was not the point of the last set. So Veteran Mercenary has not really seen any play, partially because of that, partially because 5 drops just got a lot better when the diesel cycle and all of that even showed up. And since then, there's the power level of 5 drops has continued to increase. But with merchants around and stuff, just getting a random extra card, we've seen that has real value.
Oh yeah, sure.
It's just about finding the right mono faction deck for it. Now you have a little bit more better payoff with this card and some of those decks.
Yep. And then to end things out, let us talk a little bit about the event that is happening this weekend. We have the mating call event. I am, of course, working on my event primer. It'll be out tomorrow. Mine's going to be pretty brief because I just don't even really think there's a lot to say. Because the event,
we're going to be pretty brief here. I think it's. I have like the event for it's Valentine's Day, so it's all about pairs. So you're only allowed to play a max of 2 copies of non-power cards. So
no, it has to be. It has to be 2. It has to be exactly 2 of all of them.
Apparently. Oh, okay, exactly 2. That's fair. Fair enough. So your banners or whatever, those could be 4 ofs, but even your seek powers can only be a 2 of. But luckily, we have cargo to make up for that to at least help with your power issues. It's just going to be like a pile of good stuff decks. Do you think aggro is going to be able to cobble anything together? Combo is certainly going to struggle. It's not a good place to be on build around decks at all. I'm not super into this format. It's like the worst of Singleton combined with the worst of Constructed. It's just like this weird middle ground that I'm not into.
Yeah, I think that this is Rakano should be able to put together like an okay deck. That's the only deck that I can think of that has a deep enough bench to put together a good deck. Skycrag is a little bit like hard for it. Definitely something like Winchest and Genève are the favorites out of the gate as being the best decks in my mind, because they just have such a high density of absurd cards that you just throw them all in the deck together. You play like the power base that you played before, and like if you took, for instance, the Genève Sunnyvale decks and that are here now, and then just like kind of almost at random chose cards that I've seen play before, and you'll be fine.
Yeah. I think if I were to play in this event, I would not take it too seriously and play something like Strangers. Just kind of break them back out. It's been a while. I think that could be fun. Although Strangers without 4 Horrors Chamber is sketchy. And maybe try and make something like that sort of fun stuff work. But yeah, I think ultimately just 3 faction good stuff. You're still going to have access to all the fixing you really want, and you're going to have access to a lot of just good stuff playables where you don't need necessarily crazy good synergy or whatever. You just have good cards to throw on. And the other big thing is no market. So that will change things as well. So that will really cut down on consistency of decks, and again maybe make the good stuff piles a little more appealing, where you're not relying on drawing that one card to make your curve work. Your curve's just gonna work because you have a redundancy of threats and removal.
Yeah, definitely. I think the bigger change is that the no markets, but I think that in some respects, like that doesn't change very much about the deck building exactly, because the decks that are going to do well in this kind of event would do well with or without the market. It really just rewards the decks that have generic good power level and a deep roster of strong cards. And so Genève and Winchest and Corendon mid-range are those decks. And things like aggro and control. And I mean, control, you might have something that's decent, but like aggro and combo are just dead.
Yeah, even controls like kind of sketches. Like, okay, you could play 2 Hailstorm, 2 Harsh Rule, 2 End of the Story, I guess. Then like kind of cobble it together and make it work. But even then, you're like gonna start struggling to find the right card draw and finishers. But yeah, it might be an interesting event to try it once or twice. But I'm not that interested in playing watered down decks necessarily, unless I prefer, rather than straight up deck building restrictions, I'd rather see like slight rule changes. I find those a little more interesting, where it's like, oh, all these cards are now interacting on a different axes that we're not used to. Those are the events I find really enjoyable.
I mean, my preference is the ones that have the really wacky rules. I've been very clear that my favorite ones so far have been things like the permanent night event, and then the Company of Exiles. The Company of Exiles is that's the name of that one. I think the one that. But yeah, those ones are great. But I think that will do it for. Oh man, I can't wait till I want them to run that back now that we have sites. Oh my lord, the spells would fucking hell. I'm there. I'm down.
Yeah. Oh man, trading posts. Meta defining.
You betcha. You betcha. Okay, so that will do it then for today. Thank you so much for joining me. I was interested if there's any comments or questions from the chat before we head out. I'm writing out that primer. As I said, this is going to be coming out tomorrow morning. It's going to be kind of brief because I just don't think there's a ton to say. And then probably my Reanimator article will be going out on Monday. Personally, I'm going to be keeping up with the streaming that I've been doing. I've been doing it largely after my son goes to bed is the typical time for it. Special events I'll be doing in the day like this, but doing a lot of streaming nowadays, which has been a lot of fun, like getting into doing that. Hoping to run maybe some campaigns starting next week. Part of it is that I just don't have very much of that streamer influence juice from before to spend. Yeah, feel better, Rhino. Don't get Reanimator nerfed me on. I make no promises. Assume the fun. How do you think the Reanimator deck is? I think that it is very solid and that people are going to have to adjust to it. I think it's busted. I am not convinced that it isn't busted, is what I would say for right now. We have to see a little bit more. We have to see kind of how the meta reacts to it. I think that good players playing the deck are going to have an absurd win rate with the deck, though.
Yeah, it's certainly on the radar of this could be a problem. Let's see how can the meta adjust, and if the meta does adjust, is it adjusting in a healthy fashion, right? Mm-hmm. Just because you can handle a deck doesn't mean it's good for the meta game, right? So that's the key to keep an eye on. Like we saw before when Reanimator was in its heyday and that meta just went to hell in a handbasket, where there was like stupid Echo Mako on one side, Reanimator going over that. You couldn't play mid-range at all. You had to play like these extreme control or aggro. It was just extremes all over the place, which was really unsatisfying to play. So if that's like, where this goes, that's a problem.
Like, definitely this is a kind of deck that polarizes the metagame a lot. And I think that's one of the things that will be interesting in how this all plays out, because what it really sits on the most are fair mid-range decks. And what that then pushes everything towards is the like aggro dedicated control with a lot of hate cards, and then the combo decks. And when you have the metagame like, it just ends up feeling a lot more rock paper scissorsy, because for like these, if you've been playing these mid-rangey like the Winchester mirrors and the Genev mirrors, like they feel very skill intensive to me. Like obviously there are times when somebody draws better than the other one and that can carry the game, but a lot of the times like it's about using your resources better and deciding when to be aggressive and when to be defensive, etc. So that's very healthy Eternal. I don't mind things being shaken up, and it isn't just grindy mid-range-ish control-ish decks entirely throughout the format. So I think the combo deck is fine to be good for at least a little while, but we definitely have to see like if this really just warps the format around it, because that could be a big problem.
Yeah, if it like pushing out Winchester a bit's fine, like this kind of good stuff removal, whatever deck. But the problem is if the deck that's pushing that out is also still suppressing like time mid-range decks, that's like every mid-range archetype being suppressed. And that's when you're going to have real problems with the meta game. That's not going to be fun for most players involved, at least in the long term.
Yeah. Well, I think that the gavel is actually in some respects kind of like a really important safety valve for this, because it is such an annoying card to deal with for that deck, and you have access to 8 virtual copies of the card, and the fact that it costs 1 so that you can, on turn 4, play Merchant plus Gavel, so there's no instance to sabotage it. This is one of the things that I would say for people who wanted to come up with a plan for this deck that improves, for instance, the market. Like, is there something that you can do to the market that is better than Burglarize to deal with that specific card. I find it hard to believe. I don't really know what you have access to without adding another faction. But
yeah, you still also have Vanquisher's Blade, but again, if all of our best hopes are just these like narrow Justice cards, we're still gonna have problems because then basically all time decks like we're seeing over Smurf talk about here with FTP, Genev is might end up having a rough time, or Genev just has to speed up its game plan and insert in some fashion and get actual pressure down that can push through the early dork wall, right? Because a lot of players are like, oh yeah, you can just counter the Grasp on 5. It's like, all right, but if they don't Grasp on 5, do you have enough pressure on board already to start the beatdowns, get it going? Because that's the issue with constantly holding up a display or whatever, is you're hurting your own development, and then they can easily transition into hard cast Rara for 8. So you've got to kill them in that window, or they sabotage you, and that leads to its own problems. So it's not just about can you answer this deck, but can we answer it in a fashion that the metagame balances out? There's room for a lot of different archetypes to breathe, and that'll be something to keep an eye on.
I think that definitely the counterspells as a way to handle this deck is just insufficient. When I've been playing against the GNF decks, that's one of the assuming that my draw is functional, the matchup is very good. Because the thing that people don't, I think that the main thing that people do, that is, the inexperienced players do, is they think that their opponent might have a counter spell. They're just saying, well, it's going to counter something eventually, so I'm going to play my Grasp into it. That's wrong. Because especially you have the sabotage, so that you can do something like set up the delinquent plus sabotage, or get rid of it, or you just time walk them for like 3 or 4 turns in a row instead of the Vara.
Yeah, it's certainly something to keep an eye on. I have not played with I haven't got my own hands on the Reanimator deck yet, so I can't really say how strong it feels. Like normally I can get a pretty good feel for it, but I will do that at some point, I guess. And I'll be interested to see. We have more answers than we have in the past Reanimator. Like we're looking at the obvious ones like Gavel, but there may be more to it than that we'll have to do some exploring with and figure out. Like other than Justice answers, what else is out there in terms of fire or time or even shadow for the mirrors? So that'll be something to explore and figure out and do some exploring.
Yeah, very interested to see where that deck goes. Just a couple other comments here on that subject. I think it's really interesting. Delinquent might be the problem. I can see that, and the other one that I think that is worth considering is Privilege of Rank. I think that what Rhino mentioned earlier is one of the ones that I had in mind about having requires Justice Influence in order to be castable. The other possibility I think somebody was mentioning earlier is having the Halesi on as Zindel to be colorless. There's a lot of these minor tweaks that they could do a surprising amount of work to slow down the deck, make it a little bit more fair, feel a little bit more honest. So we'll have to see how that all pans out, though.
Yep, it'll be I think a fun thing to keep an eye on. It's exciting times, especially now in our new Wisp world, right? I'm
meta. The Wisp meta is here, guys. The Wisp meta is here.
It's all about, hey man, I'm gonna silence your Spore Folk before you can cast it.
Yeah,
and then we'll see who's laughing. So
yeah, who could it be? It's hard to tell. Okay,
nice 1-2 for 2, idiot.
Yes. Yeah, excellent. Okay, so that'll do it then for today. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, SirRhino, and talk to y'all later.